Maybe I covered everything. Okay, I think that I may have forgotten the last thing I wanted to say, but that's okay. All right. Well, so just a few questions. Food for thought is whether, and this I think this relates to the sources that I just read, is is the impulse or the motivation to help everyone, is that just human nature, or does it come from a sense of shared humanity, or is there also the concept of tikkun olam, that in fact we have a particular Jewish ethic or investment in this? It comes. It's not just a human need or impulse, but in fact, particularly in a way Jewish impulse. And then another question. There's a very interesting article I read by Rabbi Arnold Jacob Wolf, and I can leave it here if anyone's interested in reading it. But he's talking about tikkun olam and specifically the Reform movement, and I think he just raises a number of interesting questions having to do with, well, so we have this concept of tikkun olam, and just thinking about how every individual determines what issues do we feel fit under the umbrella of tikkun olam. How do we decide what's considered tikkun olam? So those are just some things to think about, and I guess a discussion.
Yeah, I think that you've given us a very fine presentation on the sources, Boaz. And the article that he mentioned was written by the late Rabbi Arnold Jacob Wolf, who was the Rabbi Emeritus, the Rabbi at KAM Beth in Chicago. This is a very well-known congregation in the Reform movement, and he's a well-known rabbi. He did march in Selma with Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel, and he has been a champion of social justice of the first order. His last acts, I think, before he passed away last year was to, I think he died just before the election, just the day after. He worked very hard for the election of Barack Obama. But his article is surprising. I encourage you to read the article. It was originally in Judaism magazine September 22nd, 2001. And it takes a critical look of all the stuff I've been praising here. Reform takes pride in building houses and feeding the poor and lobbying for progressive legislation, women's rights, gay rights, rights for the disabled. We're, very often what we do in the Religious Action Center looks a lot like the political program of the Democratic Party or the ACLU. And you would think, somebody with Arnold Jacob Wolf's dispositions, he'd say, that's a good thing, but he didn't think it was a good thing. He felt that many of the issues that we've chosen to become active in the Reform movement are not original enough, are not Jewish in a unique way. And at the end of the article, he calls for us not to side with the soft left, not to side with those issues which don't impact us economically or socially, but in fact that we should strike out more like our forebears in the socialist movements that took bold stands that seemed impossible, like an 8-hour workday or an end to child labor, which seemed unthinkable at the beginning of the 20th century, but now is considered, axiomatic. So that there's a dialectic. There's what you go out and think is a good thing, and maybe a good thing for a while, may eventually turn out not to be such a good thing. The kibbutzim are a great example of practical social action. Anu banu arza labanotu lahibanot. We came to the land to build it and to be builded up by it. And the kibbutzim were examples of practical utopian socialism in the sense that these were consumer-producer cooperatives. And for a while they worked until they became wealthy, until they succeeded. And then much of the morale in the labor movement was sapped by success. And there's some lesson there that we need to learn. So, you know, what was social action, what was tikkun olam, a repair of the world, 40 years ago, may now be irrelevant or even a little bit negative. And what we think is really so important now may not be so important. Let me be a little provocative about that, and then we'll move on to our next topic. Think about these houses that you're building, which I think is a great mitzvah. I mean, what a wonderful thing. I was impressed by the presentation by the Habitat for Humanity people on Sunday night. And I believe in what they do, and I support what they do, and they've spoken to our ministry alliance, and we try to support them everywhere we can. Okay, that's great. You're going to build 2 houses. They've built, they said, in the last 5 years, 15 houses in Darlington County. If our estimate of the number of homeless in Florence County is like anything Darlington County, let's say that between the 2 counties, at any one time, there are 1,000 people who would qualify as being homeless. So you build these 2 houses, you've moved people from either poor housing or no housing to decent housing, which I think is fabulous. But what about the other 890 people? Okay, so how are we going to address that issue? They have Habitat for Humanity in Los Angeles. And I don't know, I didn't look up their numbers. We probably could look up their numbers. Let's say in Los Angeles County, let's be generous, say they build 100 new houses. And each house could house 5 people. So that's 500 people who are moved from either inferior housing or no housing to decent housing. That's a great thing. What about the other 89,500 people who are on the streets of Los Angeles? And so that, not to belittle anything that you do that's a mitzvah, that has some practical effect. I think it's as important for us to do it as important it is for the people who are able to buy into housing. But in terms of tikkun olam, repairing the whole problem, that's obviously will take something more systematic, to address the whole problem. Yeah, Brian.
I think particularly in the United States, where effectively we choose to be Jews every day. If you want to become a Baptist, you just go to the Baptist church, talk to the minister, do a little ceremony, and you're a Baptist. I mean, it's that easy. Tikkun olam is a distinguishing thing about Judaism. From Hillel we have, if not you, who, and if not now, when. And to me, that is the core of being Jewish. It's why.
Yeah, but dialectically. King Hillel Prosbol. Hillel, the sage from about 50 BCE, created a takana, a protective ordinance, which was meant to help banking. Okay, if the laws of the Torah were applied strictly, and every creditor had to remit every debt in the 7th year, nobody would buy seed, nothing would get planted, no manufacture. In the Shemitah year, in the 7th year, everything would come to a grinding halt. So the rabbis, the sages at that time, said, we're going to engage in financial regulation. Okay, they're going to set up a Jewish Federal Reserve Board, okay? And they're going to have the Beth Din hold the debts during the year of release, so that they can be collected after the end of the year of release. That's a takana. That's a correction of a legislative nature. And so, and what Arnold Jacob Wolf points out in his article, that until the shall we say the 1960s, tikkun meant a correction of something that is minorly out of whack. It's a minor change.